Good afternoon. Dean Anaya, distinguished faculty, proud parents, family, friends, and most importantly, class of 2015. Thank you very much for the honor to share some ideas and experiences on my social journey, my journeys of social justice with you on this special day. This honor indeed challenged me, as well as my values. During my own academic career, where I taught at first sociology at the then so-called Black University of the Western Cape, I refused to attend graduation ceremonies. It's indeed my first. Even the graduation ceremonies of my own students, many of them who inspired me immensely. They were black, they were poor, they against the odds made it in a very racist society. So why did I refuse? In my view, graduation ceremonies during apartheid South Africa marked an important initiation and co-opting of a few black students into an exclusive elite. An elite whose position of privilege was totally dependent on their disappropriate access and control over resources which actually belonged to all. The denial of the most basic human rights, dignity, and privilege of the few, of the majority, indeed was key to the wealth and the privilege of those that made it. And if, over time, increasing numbers of black students started to break down the integration of racism and inequality, it remained instrumental to the protection of white privileges for at least the last 3 decades of apartheid. We tend to view education as a means to reduce inequality and towards advancing social justice. But that was not the case in South Africa. On the contrary, advanced education, funded by public money, by and large served the rich, as well systematically increased inequality and undermined social cohesion. And unfortunately, whilst this phenomenon was extreme in apartheid South Africa, it continues to manifest itself in many other parts of the world. The extremes of increased inequality in the world today is a social time bomb. We live in a world where 1 billion people live in extreme poverty on less than $1.25 a day. In this unequal world, the 85 richest people have the same wealth as the poorest 3.5 billion. On current trends, the richest 1% will own more than 50% of the world's wealth next year. Inequality has devastating consequences, from slowing poverty reduction to increasing crime, violence, and social instability. Extreme inequality is not inevitable. It is the result of social policies. The recent financial crisis bailout packages that lacked basic transparency and, by and large, socialized capital risk to citizens, whilst gains remained privatized, is but one example of this. I consider myself to be extremely fortunate for having been confronted with the extremes of inequality, poverty, and racism on a daily basis as a teenager. At some point, I had no choice but to say no. as this oppression started to undermine my own humanity. Generally speaking, privilege tends to insulate one from the indignity billions of people suffer daily: hunger, violence, conflict, and many other human rights abuses, in a world that already currently have the expertise and resources to avoid most of these sufferings. Social policy is failing us dramatically. It is indeed easy to live here in Europe, for example, and see past the war and death and terror in Syria, or closer to home, to Kreuzberg, where some immigrants face threats, or homelessness. Most of us are usually not confronted on a daily basis with the reality that 1 out of every 5 children under the age of 15 live in poverty in Berlin. But of course, education does not naturally feel extreme inequality or undermine the social good. It is also a choice made by the beneficiaries of advanced education, by my generation, by our generations, and by the next generation of new elites, by you. And that is why I came today. I passionately believe that you have a choice. You either utilize your future positions of privilege and power to accumulate only for yourself, or to also seek to work for the broader social good and make the world a better and a fairer place, no matter what kind of career you end up choosing. In this regard, the challenge for you, new graduates of this prestigious, if young, European institution, in your journeys of social justice, in my view, will be much tougher than mine. You will need to go beyond your immediate comfort and privilege without being confronted with extreme injustice on a daily basis in your future lives and jobs. That's tough. In my job these days, where I have the immense privilege to be the Managing Director of Transparency International, a global coalition of civil society organizations operating in over 100 countries, dedicated to fight corruption, I often get disheartened about the injustices we as human beings do to each other. For example, expectant mothers made to pay $5 every time they screamed while giving birth in a hospital in Zimbabwe. Historically speaking, corruption has greased the wheels of exploitation and injustice since time immemorial. The terrible human tragedies of recent history, genocides and institutionalized racism, for example, have likewise been welded to abusive political systems that twist the public trust for private gain. The fight against corruption is central to the struggle for human rights and social justice. It is the fact that the poor and the marginalized are most affected by corruption that should give us pause. In concrete terms, it means that those with least influence often suffer most, both from the denial of social services due to grant corruption and in their daily lives as they are faced with demands for bribes in the most vulnerable situations during contact with law enforcement, healthcare providers, or the education system. In my view, we have a social responsibility to build communities and institutions at local and global levels that are transparent, accountable, and participatory. We see the importance of good, transparent, and accountable governance every day. It is an essential prerequisite for ending poverty and inequality efficiently. without governance for the social good. We see corruption feeding insurgency in war-torn lands, policy decisions being captured by the interests of the powerful instead of serving the common good, and resource-rich countries, the majority, which continue to lose what should be public wealth in offshore accounts. Today, corruption is one of the key social challenges of our time, irrespective which indicators you use. From the BBC worldwide poll that rates corruption as the most talked issue around the world, to a vast online activist community of over 30 million people choosing as third most important issue to tackle human rights. Second, climate change. Number one, corruption. To the UN's big data scraping, where grassroots feedback consistently featured corruption as one of the top priorities to be addressed in the post-2015 development goals. And in September this year, this demand from people around the world are now very likely to be included as goal number 16 in the UN Sustainable Development Goals, marking a chance for a new dawn of governance for the benefit of all instead of serving the vested interests of the few. Yet along the way, our daily lives will continue and our daily battles will continue. Just this week, we started to win one battle. In 2011, we, Transparency International, called on FIFA to urgently reform and restore public trust. We even provided a roadmap, including the importance of dealing with the past. Last week, we again stepped up our call for drastic reforms and the resignation of Mr. Blatter. His resignation this week marked a potential new era for football. It is now time to clean up FIFA. Football is a sport that gives people hope. It provides joy and dreams to billions across the world, from the poor favelas in Rio to Berlin hosting the Champions League final tomorrow. As fans, we have a love affair with football. When our teams win, we're ecstatic. When they lose, we are devastated. Ask my son. But when results of games or rights for hosting events, elections, etc., are driven not by fair competition, but by corruption, we feel betrayed. It is a further shame and a slap in the face of football fans that the cleanup of organized football has now been driven by criminal investigators. Investigations that show that at least 2 generations of football officials, the guardians of integrity of the beautiful game, reportedly abused their positions of trust to acquire millions of dollars in bribes and kickbacks. It is amazing that for so long we knew it, we said it had to stop, and it took this long. It must stop now. The pervasiveness of corruption, of course, goes way beyond sport, with financial systems and politics arguably being currently 2 of the most destructive to social progress. And this is a worldwide problem. Corruption is not a problem in itself. That is one of the biggest myths of our time. It is worldwide. For example, our research shows that across Europe, many of the institutions that define a democracy are much weaker than assumed. For example, 19 out of 25 countries surveyed do not have any lobbying regulations, highlighting the deficit of transparency of money in politics and the way decisions are made. For European citizens across Europe, corruption for the majority of them is a major problem in their country. The intransparent relationship between business and government enables corruption, hinders the advancement of social justice, and undermines economic stability also in Europe. As a young activist in South Africa, we, the ordinary people, demanded the right to speak truth to power. The world of accountability has indeed turned fantastically. Today, across the world, we, the people, demand that those in power speak truth to us, the ordinary people. I hope that you will add your voice and energies to the task of demanding and building transparency and accountability across all sectors of society. I will end with a personal experience that challenged and changed me. The first time I was imprisoned in apartheid South Africa, I was 18 years old. I was detained under the extensive South African detention laws, which included up to 180 days of detention without trial and no access to a lawyer. At that time, there were often up to a dozen white common criminals sharing one cell. As a naive 18-year-old, this was quite a frightening experience. After I was released the first time, I was counseled that I should be aware of the dangers political activists faced in prison, including violence and rape. I was scared and frightened, and above all, I had no respect for these inmates, as most of them were rough criminals and particularly racist. During my next detention spells, I was ready to fight. However, over time, I realized that against so many, I stood no chance. I then changed my strategy. I worked out, for me, that people could not engage in violence against others who they respected and loved. I still believe that to this day. So I then acted as if I respected and cared for them. And yet over time I realized you can act this for some time, but it was impossible to do so over a long and indefinite period. It has to be genuine. And this then presented me with one of my biggest challenges. I had to overcome many of my own prejudices. Many prejudices that I was indeed proud to have, because I thought it made me a better human being. I had to see beyond the racist, beyond the violent criminal, and everything that divided us, and which indeed formed my values and my identity. I had to seek to respect and to love the common humanity shared with people I thought I had nothing in common with and that I previously despised. And in doing so in prison in the years that followed is without any doubt, for me, the biggest achievement of my life. Over time, this journey to my own discovery of what we call Ubuntu in South Africa, a person is a person through other people, continues to give me strength and inspiration, especially in tough times. I have learned that personal experiences, including uncomfortable and challenging ones, often carry within themselves powerful lessons and even liberation. As you live your stories, seek to learn from them and allow them to enrich you. I close. You, class of 2015, can be very proud of yourselves today for reaching this important milestone in your journey so far. Well done, congratulations. You're arguably the first generation that has the expertise and the resources to end poverty and ensure basic human rights for all on the planet in your lifetime. You are also arguably the last generation that can prevent catastrophic climate change. Now is your time. Thank you very much.